I'm just waiting for the countdown here. Oh, we're gonna do this military precision. Hello, yes, it's 4 o'clock. So I'd like to call our Finance Committee meeting of Monday, September 9th to order. And I will begin with the roll call of everyone. I'm George Savage, I'm here. Stephen Casani. All right. Ken Levine. Chris Rittler. Here. Michelle Takai.
Here.
Bill Urban. Here. Mark Waysar. Here. Excellent. We are all here and in person today too. Nobody has to be virtual, which is very, very good. Okay. Let's see. Item 2 now is oral communications for items not on the agenda. And anyone here on the committee have something for not on the agenda? See no one. How about here in the room? All right, we will move to online, and I see that Dale Fow, you have your hand raised. You are recognized, sir.
Great. Thank you, George. First of all, I want to thank this committee for taking on some very important tasks in which may be an existential crisis for the town. So thank you for your service. Next, I'm going to reiterate my request to see a cash flow, whether it's a monthly or quarterly. I don't see any reason why we can't have that generated by the finance department. I think that is an integral part of managing a business. And number 3, I was a quick perusal just a few minutes ago of the town council meeting on Wednesday night, and it appears that there were some journal entries that were not properly posted. And I think this committee needs to be aware of that and investigate what's going on there. I thought we were on the way to solve things during the current calendar year, and it looks like there are still problems. Thanks very much, gentlemen and women.
Thank you, Dale. And let's see, I see a hand with a phone number attached to it, 400-3056.
That's me, George, Dana Breen. I'm just
Okay.
calling a request for you guys to please get your agendas out there 72 hours before you're supposed to, because your agenda didn't show up until today. And I figured since ASCC's agenda didn't show up last week on Friday for our meeting tonight, that yours was probably canceled today. So, please try to stay ahead of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I wasn't aware that it didn't come out until then. We had all the materials in Friday, I think. Ellen? Sure. That's here in the room, Ellen Bernal.
Okay, let's go for that. I just have a quick question. Is there any reason that Finance Committee cannot have 1 or 2 people on the Finance Committee have eyes on all the town accounts at all, not to be able to do anything, but to totally have eyes on? And so they can be totally up to date on what's going on and what's lagging. I think if something like that had been done in the past, we wouldn't have been in the position we're in. But I don't know if that's legal or, if there's anything against that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. Anyone else for items not on the agenda speaking? Looking here on the screen, I don't see any hands up. Okay, so nobody else there, so we will move on. Item 3, announcements and presentations. I don't have any, don't see any. We will then move to the approval of the minutes, item 4. This is from our meeting of August 19th. And do I hear a motion to approve that? Second? Any objection? All right, the minutes are adopted. Thank you. And we'll move on to new business. We're going to start out, as always, with audit status. And we have audit things to talk about, but also status of the budget and any other pressing financial items that Tony wants to update us on. So Tony, do you want to kick this off for us?
Yes, thank you, George. So for the budget, we will be bringing a revised budget, at our next council meeting, or not the 11th, but, the 24th. And, we are still reviewing, revenues and expenses, where to cut and, where to reduce. Pretty much most of the, CIP projects will be deferred, except for the ones that have to go through. There are certain ones that have some matching requirements, so that 1.1 million we had allocated for capital projects, that's going to be reduced to about 400,000. We also have budget savings in regards to staffing vacancies of about 600,000 or 700,000. But we still have to do an impact statement on with the building and planning departments, contracting out what the cost is going to be and how that's going to impact the budget as well. On the revenue side, we did find some additional revenue, but not a lot. So it's not going to be, the deficit's not going to be as much. It'll be probably around $1 million. But we're still refining the numbers as we go. And as far, and the other item is the audit. We do have the 2021 audited statements. They will be presented to council on Wednesday. But we'll probably have to redo the MD&A. As it turns out, there was multiple versions of the MD&A that I was working on. And I sent the wrong version to the auditors for them to do their ticking and tying. They were just looking at the numbers. They weren't necessarily looking at the content of the MD&A. So that's on me. But we'll still take the audited statements to council on Wednesday, but we'll probably have to revise the MD&A before we actually publish the document. But it shouldn't take too long. And then the other item is, in light of Chairman Powell's recent comments about reducing interest rates, met with Commissioner Urban, and we decided to move about 4 million from our treasury fund, which is currently earning 4.76% yield. But that fund is most sensitive to any rate reduction. So we're going to take about 30%, which is about 4 million, and we're putting it into our fixed income portfolio. Those are earning between 3.7 and 4.5. So we want to mitigate some of the risk in the interest rate, not knowing if it's going to be a 25 basis point reduction or 50 basis point reduction. So we're just going to monitor this, see what the rate reduction is in September, how that impacts our yields in Schwab, and then we'll adjust accordingly as we'll be able to make movements before the rate reductions. So that way we'll maximize our yield. That's all I have.
I have a question on the budget. We'll be meeting, I think, is it the 18th?
Yes.
So 6 days ahead. Will we be able to see that?
Yeah,
ahead of
I
the
will,
council?
we will, once it's all finalized, we'll send it out to the finance committee for their review and input.
Great.
But the meeting itself is
Mhm.
actually going to be after when the agenda is due for that meeting the following week. So, but I'll.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
That way we can look at it
Yeah.
close.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I have one question. So Tony, how do you update town council and potentially this committee on which CIP projects are approved and moving ahead versus which ones are put on top?
Well, we'll be bringing that to the council meeting and we'll have a recommendation of these are the projects. I mean, there's projects that have to go because there are matching requirements. Because there's additional funding sources for these projects. So those have to go. The rest are pretty much at our discretion. And we'll have a recommendation. We're not going to fund these this particular year. Council may say, no, I want this to go through or not. And that's pretty much how the process works.
So we'll see those when you
Yeah.
put together the budget presentation for town council.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
More comments here? Or on the audit materials and so?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did want to add one thing.
Great.
Not included with the audit was the memorandum on internal control. This should have been included with your attachments. Basically, this is the auditors saying, hey, we've noticed either material weakness or significant deficiency. We did identify some in regards to our segregation of duties. At the time, this is as of 2021. There were 2 members of the finance staff, so segregation of duties is an automatic. Other deficiencies noted were journal entry reviews, approvals, and timelines. Again, we had 2 people in staff. That goes with segregation of duties as well. Timing of bank reconciliations, we only have 2 people on staff, things fall behind. And then reconciliation of payroll journal entries with payroll at register. This clearing up this one is actually going to have an impact on the fund balance to the good. These are some of the accounting entries that I've mentioned in the past that I've located and discovered that, oh, if we make these corrections, it's actually going to help in our fund balance for the general fund. Outstanding checks, again, we do have a long list of outstanding checks that we have not been able to address. Some that they've been issued, they just haven't been cashed. Or we our positive pay system works with our bank account at TechCU. They just haven't trued up whether the bank check's cleared or not. Out of compliance with the investment policy, we're actually in compliance with the investment policy now because the investment policy gets renewed when the town treasurer is named every year. So that item's been actually corrected. There's a new GASB pronouncement. This is on page 8. Just have to make sure that these are reflected in our financial statements beginning after 2019. And the auditors are working on that as well. One big one is leases. We don't really have many leases as far as copiers or equipment or anything like that. So we think the impact is going to be negligible in regards to GASB 87. Page 11, timeliness for the completion of audits. That's a carryover item from 2020. This is going to continue until we are caught up. So when you see 2022, you're going to see some of these carry over from year to year. And as we clean them up, they'll come off the list. And that is what the memorandum of internal control is from the auditors. Basically lists material weaknesses or significant deficiency. Now, if it was something in here that would have caused a material misstatement on the financial statements, it would have been noted in the memorandum of internal control and also would have been noted in the audit letter, which was attached to the financial statements. The financial statements are unmodified. That means the financial statements materially reflect reasonably the financial position of the town of Port Colborne. So that is my report on items related to finance.
When you get the final draft of the management discussion, can you send that?
Yes,
to us as
absolutely.
well? Great, thank you. It'd be good to read the final one. I don't have any detailed questions in the financials and the audit because being 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Just the fact that they add up is what I'm mainly.
To the chair, I have a request since we didn't have a chance to see this latest memorandum and I haven't had a chance to read it. I'd ask that we put it on the agenda for our next meeting so we have a chance to read through it and think through it. But we got a very quick overview by Tony, but I think we need to look at this more closely, given the issues we've had in town over the last 2 to 3 years and give it time it deserves. Thanks.
I think that's great. Anyone else with comments on this item here on the panel? All right, I'll open this to comments with the public. Anybody here in the room want to talk about this? All right, seeing no one, moving online, we've got Rita. Rita, you've had your hand up for a while. Please talk to us.
Thank you for taking my comment. Audits aren't easy to do. And then when you have an incomplete audit where you have to make a lot of corrections, especially since we've been waiting so long for these audits, I look forward to reading the whole document with all of these updated attachments. Our finance director was mentioning that the money that we're saving by not having employee spots filled in our town. We're not saving anything that way, especially with the costs based on recent warrant lists of the amount of money that we're paying in contractors. And I really hope that the budget information reflects how much we are actually paying out each month in contractors. And also how much we're billing back. You know, we have a couple of things that we do for, say, for Stanford, and we're supposed to get reimbursed on. And there's probably other items that we're supposed to get reimbursed on. And I always look at the documents to see if we can see the receivables. And in light of, you know, possibly checks not being found, it would be nice to see at least some separate information about the receivables. Thank you very much for all that you do, especially the volunteers on the dais. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita, for your comment. I see the hands raised for a couple of Karens, so we will start with Karen Vatra. You were first.
Thank you. All of my comments are really process comments. The first one is the letter from Mays indicates it was finished on April 15th. So that's a 5-month delay between the time the audit was finished and where we're here now, and that just seems excessive. The second comment was already addressed, but I want to emphasize that again, a process that the memorandum of significant deficiency was not included. Neither was the report about the missing checks. I think some of these have been updated. I noticed that the town council has some of that information in their agenda now, but we really do need the 72 hours. It's kind of a rush for all of us to look through that information. And then my final comment on process is the kind of related to the budget. I think the biggest thing that I noticed is that our budget for general expenses for this particular period was 2.8 million, but our final expenditures were 3.7 million. That is a huge amount of a difference. And we need to track that, and we need to actually, if we make a budget, keep to whatever budget we made. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Karen Askey, you're next.
Hi there. I just wanted to state I agree with the previous comments from Rita and Karen on this, and I have a very small minor request as the town moves forward, looking at revenues and expenses. And this is with me being on Parks and Rec Committee. The Parks and Rec Committee does generate revenue in terms of league fees and the parking lot fees and such. And we think it would be nice if it started being accounted for as such. So when we look at what we're spending on field maintenance and such, we also see what we're taking in to support that. So it's very minor, but it is something as we move forward that it'd be great to have. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that comment. Other commenters here online? Anyone else? Okay, I don't see anyone, so we can move on to number 2. And I think, or rather 5B, which is, I think, Tony, you may already have touched on this, but wondering if there needs to be any further discussion on the cash management discussion, the allocation changing in light of interest rate trend.
I think that was material information that I presented. We just moved 4 million from our treasury fund to our fixed income.
Yeah, it certainly seems appropriate to me. I'm wondering, members of the committee, any comment on that move?
Just a question on the term. What's the longest term that we will allocate funds to? I assume these are all
They're all
short term.
Yeah. All not exactly sure the maturity dates, but they're all short term. And we still have, I mean, we have 18.5 million in our Schwab account. We have about 2 million in Leif. And then the rest is in our, we have two bank accounts, one at Bank of America and one at TechCU. So we have approximately about 21 to 22 million dollars just in cash. About 15 or 16 million of that is liquid.
Let me provide a little more background, because this is one of the first times since we've had the investment fund that we had a good consultation between a couple of members of this committee, George and I, and Tony and staff. And as Tony already talked about, we've already noticed, as you have, that it's likely short-term interest rates are going to be coming down very soon when the Fed starts meeting. And that's an opportunity and a risk to it, as Tony was saying. We're still getting over 5% on the about 13.5 million in the money market fund, but that's the first yield that's going to drop within hours or days after the Fed taking its first step. That reacts immediately, because the Fed does control, the short-term overnight lending rate. All the other interest rates in the market are not controlled by the Fed. The market determines what they are. They tend to come down over time when the short-term rates drop. So we said that's likely to happen. We don't know how much or when, but it's clear to us that our budget is built on a 5% assumption on basically all of our cash reserves, I think, including the cash that's not earning much at all that's in bank accounts. I'm not sure about that, but in any event, for budgeting purposes, we had a 5% assumption. That assumption has probably been okay up to this point. That's probably a bad assumption, within a month or two from now, unless we make a tweak. So the idea we talked about is what all bond investors know is longer maturity bonds. On average, you don't know what their interest rate is, but their rates may come down as well, but the price of the existing bonds that you own in a portfolio, like the exchange traded funds we have, will go up, because the existing bonds become more valuable when new bonds come to market of similar quality, but at a lower interest rate. That's the effective duration. So if you can predict it, what you do is you go longer on your bonds when you're convinced the interest rates are coming down. So we can't be sure about how strong that effect's going to be or when it's going to start. We think it'll start showing up more in the marketplace within, a week or two after the Fed moves. So this is a way to try to recapture at least the 5%. We may not be able to earn 5% in our money market anymore, but if we can pick up 1 or 2% more on all of our ETFs as the price of existing bonds comes up while the rates drop, we have a better chance of actually making that revenue forecast. So it's really driven by the budget and what we need to get, and then making a guesstimate about when that's all going to happen. I think our expectation is we're probably going to make more moves out of the money market fund into the 3 exchange traded funds we have, which all have about 2.5 to 3 year durations. Just remind you, I think most of you are aware, we're under California law, we're not allowed to hold bonds at the time we acquire them of longer than 5 years duration. Because if we really believe this, we'd want to go out and buy 20-year treasuries. You can't do that. There actually may be some 5-year ETFs or bonds we could buy, but that's probably a discussion that we might have with staff for a later date. The good news I can tell you is I watched the price from the time that Tony made this change with $4 million out of the money market into the ETF funds. That ETF basket gained 0.451% since he made that trade last week. That sounds like a small number. It's 0.5%, but it's $20,000 new money because it's $4 million that moved. So this is not insignificant cash that you can get on the edges, and it's the kind of stuff that we need to, keep looking for, and I think we will.
Excuse me, just so I'm clear, does this mean we could potentially invest in 5-year? Potentially, yes, but is that the strategy right now, to invest in 5-year, which I consider longer term as opposed to shorter term?
Well, I don't think it's officially a strategy. It's, a couple of us have thought about what can we do to further enhance our investment returns. We could, I think maybe we'll have another discussion, at least with Tony in the next month, about a 5-year. We had to find something that doesn't go over 5 years. We have to follow the law on this, and there's a couple of 5-year ETFs out there. We could buy 5-year treasuries direct, but then we had to open up a treasury direct account, and believe me, that's more hassle than the town is probably ready to deal with. But I think it's something we had to look at, and I can tell you that I'm gonna be following what's happening to the 5-year bond market and see how it moved. Again, the problem is you can't predict precisely what's gonna happen to longer term bond yields just because the short's coming down, so.
Yeah, and the opposite can also be true, where you lose on the longer term, given the duration. So I'd be as concerned about that, because the Fed can't control the long end. And
Right.
I guess my concern, not that I know, I wish I did, if we were borrowing a lot of money, the country's borrowing a lot of money, that could increase longer term rates, which I think is as big a risk as maybe downward movement.
There's one other thing which, I mean, Tony may want to come out now or later. Is, do we still have basically low yielding cash in our 2 bank accounts, Bank of America and TechCU, that could be moved in the investment account if we go to a dynamic or an active cash movement strategy where, you know, we don't put money in the investment portfolio and we leave it alone for 6 months, where there might be a couple times a month, there might be movement money out, you know, in the investment portfolio moves out to cover a warrant list, to cover a payroll, so that we're maintaining the minimum amount of cash in our low yielding bank accounts that we need to meet whatever minimums. And we are still just prepared to move money a couple times a month, you know, could be more often than that. I mean, corporate treasuries are moving money 10 times a day. And, you know, many of us at home are moving our money around, you know, 3 or 4 times a week. Not proposing that, but maybe once or twice a month, you know, 5 days before our warrant list, we move money from the investment account. After we're past payroll, whatever, maybe we move some money back and just try to keep the cash really low in the accounts. I think we have people now, we have the tools electronically to see what's going on. I think we can be more focused on that. And I think it would pay benefits. Again, everything we're trying to do to, you know, save money, generate some revenue. This is not on the official list of revenue increasing opportunities that we're analyzing, but it's something we ought to be thinking about as part of our normal, you know, house cleaning or housekeeping in the finance area, I would say.
Yeah, just to elaborate, yes, I mean, it is part of what I do. I look at the bank balances every day. And it's, you know, our Bank of America account is, we process payroll, so we keep the balance in there just to cover payroll, and TechCU is our main checking account. There are a couple of, there's a savings account and a money market account in TechCU, very low balances, very low, very negligible amount. Most of it's in the checking account. But yes, if the balances do get to a certain point, we'll either shoot it off to LAIF, which is our local agency investment fund, which is up in Sacramento, or it's the state, or we can move it to Schwab, depending on the yield rate. The things about LAIF is it's a lagging indicator. So when interest rates go up, it's lagging, but when interest rates go down, it's lagging. So but it's to me, it's the fun part of what I do. It's just where the money, where I think the money's going to be, where the interest rates I think are going to be. It's really good to speculate, but again, I mean, I won't make a move without, you know, seeking advice. Bill and I had a very good conversation, and I look forward to having more of them.
Great, thank you for that discussion. That was very illuminating. And I just want to emphasize that we're just putting a portion of the funds in these bond ETF. So if we're not quite 100% correct on the direction of interest rates in the long term, we're still hedged very nicely. So it seems like a very prudent thing to do. So if there's no more discussion here on the
Quick question on that. So Tony, how do you publish? What's the allocation of the investment portfolio between these bond funds and basically?
Well, that is what is going to be published in our developing treasurer's report and our fund balance report. The treasurer's report will have a breakdown of all the balances in our bank accounts and then have a reconciliation to the fund balance. But to get to that point, you have to have all the audits done.
Yeah.
To get to the fund balance point. I can produce, and if the finance committee would like that, I could come with to each meeting saying, here's our balances. in Schwab, TechCU, Bank of America, by the end, as of the end of the month. Way our Schwab account, I didn't add this in my presentation. The 4 million was allocated proportionally to where each, there's 3 funds in the ETFs. And so I allocated that 4 million proportionately, because there's a limit to the corporate shares. We can only have up to 30%. So, but the government shares are actually yielding higher than the other 2. So, so that's how I allocated the 4%, but I can produce a report that will break down all the accounts.
That would be great. I'm sure we all would appreciate seeing that. Other comments here from the committee? All right, I'll open this item to conversation from the public, and I noted a hand up here in the room. If you could go to the microphone so people online can hear who you are and what you have to say.
Good afternoon. My name is Ray Williams. I've lived on Wyndham Drive for like 70 years, and I'm a retired KPMG partner. And so my curiosity is if the auditors have given us a written analysis of our internal controls, so we have a good idea of what goes in, goes out, and it goes to the right place, and we have somebody assigned to fix it.
Thank you very much. Any other comments here on this item? Okay, and we'll move to the main event, which is item C. And this is continuation of our working group updates. For those who weren't here at the last meeting, we considered a number of options for cutting expenditures. And then we looked into, we're beginning to think about revenue enhancing measures. Some that we had discounted as not worthy of further analysis at that time was acquiring new land by annexation. I think that was one, and also selling land. There's a state law that makes that challenging. What we're left with to discuss today, I believe, is the charter town concept, and then parcel tax and utility users tax. I'm suggesting that we start with the charter town idea and do a readout on that. We could start with that too. Okay, we'll start with the parcel tax. Okay. We will do what Michelle suggests. We're going to reverse that and go to parcel tax UUT, then finish out with the wonders of charter town.
Okay, so I'll take the lead. George and I, over the past number of weeks, were looking at different revenue opportunities, facing the reality of $1 million deficit going forward and trying to get our arms around what is the scope of revenue opportunities that exist for the town. So in the packet that we sent out in the prior meeting, and I think it was included in this meeting too, we wanted to just share openly some of the things that we discussed, have a brief conversation on those. These have been reviewed with Tony as well. And then at least lay the groundwork for what we should do next. Again, please take this conversation as this is an assessment of opportunities for the town to generate more revenue to close the deficit. So in the handout, there were 6 options that were proposed and looked at. Some of them have been set aside, but for completeness, I'll walk through them. So option 1 was really, we were just talking about interest. And we have significant assets that are under management by our finance committee, as Tony just indicated, by the discussion with Bill. In round numbers, we have about $22 million of assets under management. About 16 million of those dollars are in restricted funds. So one of the questions that was posed was, could we redirect the interest from those restricted funds to be utilized to offset general fund expenditures? Just to give you order of magnitude, because I think order of magnitude is very important for all of us as citizens to understand. At a 5% interest rate, we're talking about $1 million of interest that we could potentially generate here. At 3.75%, which might be more what the future is holding, obviously that's going to be a lower number, closer to about $550,000. Now, keep in mind, we have $1 million deficit that we're facing. Okay, so we have to find $1 million somewhere. It does turn out, though, that our ability to utilize interest is limited. We cannot take interest from a restricted fund and redirect it to general fund expenditures. So those funds, while the work is being done by our finance committee to generate that interest, we cannot offset those, cannot use those funds for general fund expenditures. Having said that, Tony and I had a conversation about, now that we're getting the auditing done completely and Tony and Sharif have their arms around the expenditures more accurately, there may be a possibility to allocate more of the administrative overhead to some of these funds. In other words, charge some of the expenditures that are hitting the general fund against the appropriate restricted fund. Now, this is not a $100,000 solution. This is maybe a tens of thousands of dollars solution, okay? However, it is probably the best we can do. We do have a finance team that we have to figure out how to fund. This is the way I look at it. We're paying for a finance team that's very capable. Part of their time is spent managing the investment funds. That time that they spend managing over $16 million of restricted funds should be charged to those funds, as in if you had a portfolio manager managing your own money, you would be paying them to manage your money. They're our portfolio manager for the restricted fund. Again, maybe tens of thousands of dollars of opportunity, but we'll take every win we can get, right? So Tony, as we get through the audits more, will, look at, are there ways to allocate overhead expenses to some of these restricted? Tony, you have anything you want to add to that or that?
No, you covered it.
Okay. Option 2 was actually a subset of option 1, so it should be pretty quick. It is our largest restricted fund is the open space fund at $8.2 million with UUT plus interest. This grows at a very healthy rate. It's forecasted to be $8.9 million by the end of this year. We're facing $1 million deficit, and this fund is a very large asset that the town had. Again, we looked at interest. What could we do regarding interest? You cannot reallocate the interest from that fund to offset general fund expenses. However, the management overhead potentially could be booked against the general fund. So 1 and 2 were, I would say, this was a brainstorm and hopeful. We're trying to find ways to leverage the assets we have so that we could, offset our deficit. Should we
I'm sorry.
go through them all?
So to summarize, out of 1 and 2, we're talking just the overhead allocation.
Yeah, so 1
Okay.
and 2 comes down to,
Overhead
it
alloc-
will become an overhead allocation.
which isn't
once we
huge.
get to
Okay.
that point. Yeah.
Along the lines, couldn't, using the same concept of charging someone for their expenses, couldn't the open space fund pay for the town's expenses with regard to trails and other things that might be considered as open space?
I don't have an answer to that question. I'd have to defer to someone who is much more knowledgeable about the open space fund and what expenditures could be booked.
The
Okay.
language on the open space fund is that the funds are used for the acquisition and preservation of open space. Now, maintenance of trails in open space, that's preservation. In my opinion, yes, I believe that maintenance of trails and open space, the open space fund can be used for that because that's written in the description of the fund.
Offhand, do you have a sense for how much we spend on that activity?
Not off the top of my head, sorry.
I suspect it's not the,
But again, I think we're looking for everything we can get. So I would say, I think we should take an action and maybe we can work with the open space committee and come up with a order of magnitude of what that might be.
okay, good idea.
Let me just add one other item. There's, the Open Space Committee is also among themselves, thought about the fact that even the way we have it now, where they're getting their proportionate share, as they should under state law, of the all the commingled funds, because we have restricted funds, but they're not in separate accounts. They're, Tony does the allocation appropriately as required. But the Open Space Committee is aware that since their fund, as well as the Illusion in lieu of, and I think Measure A, I think those three funds are more than 50% of the total, liquid assets of the town. And most of those three funds, and the biggest one being the open space, does not require liquidity to pay warrant lists or, handle, payroll. There may be some cost of their proportionate of the overhead as you're alluding to, but I know at least that committee has been thinking about requesting a separate account number for the open space fund so that their monies and their earnings on them would be automatically and proportionally and correctly allocated without us having to do anything at town staff in terms of where the money's going. There would still have to be a discussion of allocation and all that kind of stuff from expenses. Because in their view, and if I was a, proponent of the open space, I'd say, why should we're providing 50 or 60% of the funds for the town? Why do we have to get low interest rates or bad interest rates because the 50 or 60% of share of our money that's sitting over in the bank isn't earning anything for open space? If we had our own account number, just like, as individuals, we have a retirement account and our checking account. We don't want our retirement funds to be penalized because they equal 20 or 30% of our total funds, because we have to assume a proportionate amount of that is sitting in the checking account earning no interest. So there could be, there's another side of this. I'm not sure. The point is, I think you're already aware of this, the amount we might be able to get out of this by, doing more targeted allocations might be maybe diminishingly small by the time we get through all that. It's kind of what I'm guessing, because there's arguments the other way as well. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, again, the purpose of this conversation is to figure out how to close the deficit on the
Right.
general fund.
Right.
I'll leave it to others.
It's more the
to
brainstorming.
optimize
I understand. It's a brainstorming
Yeah,
part now.
yeah,
We're seeing things.
So I hear you though. I understand and empathetic to that as well.
Just to add to Ken's point, I was looking at the budget for the coming year. And in trail rehab, trail bridges, repair and so forth, there's about $150,000 in the budget, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a pretty meaningful number.
Yeah, that is, that's more than I thought.
Did you want me to continue through the options or take comments on
I
what we've covered?
think it might be good to go through the.
I think go through them
And then
and
we'll
then open
comments
it
at
up.
the end.
Okay. All right. So we'll we'll come to the question in the room once we complete the option.
No, wait, we're gonna do comments at the end of the full discussion of this thing. Okay, so just hold it and remember it and we'll get to you.
All right, so I'm going to move through the remaining 4 items. So today, we have UUT that is 7.5%. 2% of that goes to open space. So the 5.5% goes to general fund. This is a ballot measure that was passed a while ago. This is definitely a decision for the electorate, not something you can move quickly on, nor casually on. However, if you do look at the 2% that we are utilizing of UUT for open space, that amounts to about $400,000 a year. Again, trying to get order of magnitude, if we have $1 million deficit that we're facing at 2% UUT is worth about $400,000 in round numbers. So that means one option, which again would have to go out for vote, and I believe it requires a supermajority, would be either a temporary or a permanent redirection of the 2% for open space to fund the general fund. Another, and that's option 3. Option 4 would be, well, we could increase UUT overall, right? Our total UUT sits at 7.5%. We could have a ballot measure to increase UUT by a certain percent. Again, just to keep it in mind, about 1% UUT increase gets you about $175,000. So when you're looking at $1 million deficit, I don't think UUT gets you all the way there. It's going to take a number of these things. And again, for everyone, UUT is user's utility tax. We all get taxed as citizens. It's on our bills. It could be on any one of our bills from our utility companies. So this is an increase in tax. Part of the purpose of this discussion is to make it real for everyone what the magnitude of a UUT could get you. If you're trying to close $1 million deficit, you might be able to get 400,000 for about 2%, 200,000 for 1%. Order of magnitude, that would definitely take a ballot measure that would have to be brought to the town council and then brought to the citizens. All right, so moving along, parcel tax. Parcel tax is another item that's been discussed. We do not have a parcel tax currently. Just again, to give scope here, if we did a $60 parcel tax on each parcel, it's about $100,000 of revenue generated. So if we want $1 million of revenue generated to offset the $1 million deficit, we're talking about $600 parcel tax. Just for me, it's good to get kind of the order of magnitude on these numbers, because we throw around a lot of these ideas and say, we should do X. Well, it's not going to be X. It's probably going to be X, Y, Z, and maybe ABC as well to get it there. And then finally, there was a great discussion back in March, which I believe anyone who's interested in finances here in Portola Valley has now listened to or reviewed the materials from with the independent firm who came in to really assess, are we getting our fair share of our real estate tax from the county? I'll ask Mark to comment on some of the additional work he's done. But again, order of magnitude of our 3.82% that we get for the general fund plus a 0.47% ERAF. All of this was discussed in a prior meeting. That amounts to around $3 million of revenue. If we are able to move that by 0.1%, every 0.1% counts here. That's about $70,000. So again, if we're looking for $1 million, you know, we would have to move those numbers significantly through discussions with the town. So purpose of this, let's call it sensitivity analysis, was to put all of the ideas kind of side by side and say, okay, this is the little sense of reality here. And we have more work to do. And, but before I make a closing comment, Mark, do you want to just comment on you and Craig have been doing some work with the town?
Sure. No, thanks, Chris. So the summary is that it's still very much a work in progress. And the second part is that it's complicated. And the third part is that it'll be multi-step to see if we can actually augment the town revenues in any way, but it's going to be a process if it's achievable at all. So Craig and I did have a good discussion with a senior person in the County of San Mateo who was helpful, and we've gotten some information there. At a high level, what we were trying to do, this really started with the work that Steve and I were doing as the working group to just evaluate just a starting place. And the starting place with regard to the revenue is the consultant report from Korn and Krone, where fundamentally we wanted to just independently test or independently prove that all of those numbers were accurate to the extent that we could, recognizing that we are not experts in these fields, but we have some, time. So we have time and interest, and if we're interested in this topic, and this information should be publicly available. This is where it got difficult by going into the County of San Mateo process and started to get it bounced around to various groups within there. But at this point, so Craig and I did have a good discussion where we're starting to get some information, and fundamentally what we're trying to do is compare really what remittance we get. So of the total taxes paid by property owners in Portola Valley that go to the tax collector of San Mateo County, some portion which you mentioned comes back through a couple of different mechanisms. We wanted to compare that to, well, what should it be? And how do we compare to towns that are quite similar, namely Woodside? It strikes me just from, it just at a high level, we seem to be getting a lower percentage, but as to exactly why, I do not know. And that's really where we're trying to pursue. We may get to the point where we understand why we get a lower percent, and if that's just the way it is, and there's really not a lot we can do about it, or it may be that it provides an avenue for us to try to increase the percent that comes back to the town.
Yeah, great. And thanks for that. And I know you've been digging away with a pick and a shovel, so good luck and keep going. So, so to wrap up on the options before we open it for discussion, I think what we're facing as I look at this, and George and I have looked at it, and Tony and I discussed it briefly, is really kind of next steps are we're going to have to pick a couple options, most likely, put together more refined recommendations and have that conversation with town council if we have a hope of closing $1 million deficit here. So, so I'll pause there. I don't know, George, if you have any comments or questions.
Yeah, I think this is all very good food for thought. It looks like so far, we haven't heard from the Charter Town side yet, so I want to do that before we go to other comments, just so we have all the options on the table. But it looks like parcel tax, UUT are the biggest revenue drivers, unless Charter Towns and documents somehow big contributors. I don't know yet. So I don't hear from that group. I'd like to save it for the end of this agenda item. So let's get them all out on the table, and then everyone out there, hold your comments, questions, add to them, and hear from everyone at the end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, George. So a real property transfer tax is another possibility for increasing our revenues. Last week, we kind of looked at, as George previously stated, we looked at reducing expenditures through either delay or canceling things, or we looked at using our accumulated reserves. And today we talked about just now, parcel taxes, UUT taxes. Another tax is, of course, real property transfer taxes. Surprisingly, we all pay a real property transfer tax already. Every county in the state of California charges $1.10 per $1,000 of value property transfer tax. So we've all paid that, having purchased something, property in Portola Valley. So a real property transfer tax is very similar to a property tax. However, the town gets 100% of a transfer tax. And as we just learned, that we get 5-6% of our property taxes that each of us pay to the county. Second thing is that the transfer tax is only collected when property changes ownership, as opposed to every year. However, under California law, only charter cities may propose and adopt with voter approval a significant RPTT, the transfer tax. There are two types of cities in California: charter cities, which operate under the city's local charter, and general law cities, which operate under the general laws of the state of California. We are currently a general law city. So to enact a transfer tax, the town must also become a charter city. This is unfortunate, but that's the law. Both changes to a charter city and the enactment of a transfer tax need voter approval. And consideration of a transfer tax must occur at the same time as a council election. So basically, the first time this could come to the voters would be November of 26. However, voters can approve both a change to a charter city and a transfer tax at the same election. And a number of cities in Northern California are doing that in this November, as a matter of fact. While researching the transfer tax, Michelle and I learned that the Palo Alto and Mountain View already have transfer taxes. Los Altos Hills and Atherton are both currently exploring doing this. In fact, some of our information is from what Los Altos Hills has presented at their town council meetings. With regard to who pays and how would this appeal to voters, like property taxes, everyone who owns property ends up paying. And like property tax, the payment is proportional to the value of the property. However, unlike property taxes, the tax is only paid when the property is sold. In case you missed it, the last time you sold or purchased your property, as I already indicated, we've all paid $1.10 to the county in transfer taxes. Either the buyer or the seller pays the tax, or it can be split. It's basically a negotiable item. So whatever value of taxes, revenue that we need, we can set the rate to match that. If we want $850,000, it would be approximately $3.30 per $1,000. And Michelle has a chart, Excel spreadsheet, which we could go over just to see what the values are. And you're sharing that.
Okay, so hopefully you can all see the spreadsheet out there. It's on the screen. Anyway,
Yeah, I'm sharing it, so
Okay,
everyone online can see it. People in the room, I'm sorry, well, you can see it on the monitor, great.
okay, so the first column is data by calendar year, and as you know, the town is on a June 30 fiscal year. We couldn't find quarterly data, so anyway, we're stuck with calendar year data. The other thing we found is that many of you, all of you get brochures from real estate agents showing sales data. And what we discovered is those the real estate data probably includes Portola Valley town sales. So the number of sales numbers are probably higher than the true town numbers. And so we use data from Paula Cohn, her March 25th, 24 presentation to us. And since she's the property tax expert, we hope her data is correct. But at the next column, you can see the number of sales, and you can see quite a range from 80 in 2020 to 38 in last year. And on the far right column is the 30-year fixed rate. And obviously, the reason in 23 it was so low is we had an average 7% fixed rate. What's interesting is my latest real estate brochure I got. And again, this is a slightly inflated number, shows for the first half of this year, 2024, there were 36 sales. So quite a nice number. But again, it's a little inflated because it includes non-Portola Valley sales. And so the next column are, again, from Paula, would be average price of sales in Portola Valley, and the median price, which is the median meaning the middle price. And then she had residential plus multifamily and commercial sales. So this tax would apply to non-residential sales as well, but there aren't very many, as you can imagine. Okay, so getting to the next column, just based on random, or just based on sales on tax rates for cities nearby, Mountain View and Palo Alto have a $3.30 per thousand. San Jose has a $6 per thousand, and San Mateo has a $7 per thousand of property tax value. So, and at the very bottom, I took a 5-year average just to spread it out, and we're at $3.30, the town would receive roughly 850,000. At $6 per thousand, the town would receive roughly 1.5 million, and at $7 per thousand, the town would receive roughly 1.8 million. So once we know our structural deficit, we can pick a rate for the average. I would suggest an average that would match our deficit. And the nice thing, which Ken will probably mention, is hopefully this goes up with inflation. It's not fixed like a parcel tax, or yeah, the UUT would go up with inflation. And for those of you out there wondering, well, what does this mean to me? First of all, if you're clever, you can get the buyer to pay for it. Although I'm not sure how difficult that would be. But if you look at the various median prices, which range over the years shown from about 2.9 to 4.6, you look at the median price, and then you look and you go over to different tax rates, and then you can see what in theory it would cost a buyer or seller. So again, at an average of the median, at the $3.30, it'd be 12,000 roughly. At $6, it'd be 25,000, and at $7, it'd be roughly 30,000. And again, you as the owner would not necessarily pay it if you can get the buyer to instead. I think that's it for now.
Okay, so those are the numbers associated with this. Unfortunately, it's also a little complex to implement this, but not impossible. A lot of cities are doing it. Because only charter cities can implement the transfer tax, you must first write and adopt the town charter. And this would require the consideration of many issues. In drafting a charter, it would take time and it would be fairly costly. The change to a charter city is also subject to approval by a majority of voters. The adoption of a transfer tax would be subject to approval by a majority of voters for a general purpose tax, but would require 2/3 of voters for a special purpose tax. So if we wanted to make the tax for public safety, it would require 2/3. If you just wanted to go to the general fund, it would just require a majority of voter approval. The cost to implement this, according to Los Altos Hills, their estimate for them was that it would cost approximately $150,000, which they split out as $60,000 of manager and attorney time, $50,000 for communications with citizens, and $40,000 for polling of voters. And I think the polling of voters had to do with how much, what was the sweet spot that they would accept as an additional tax, a transfer tax. So the nice thing about this is really the future flexibility. Like property taxes, a transfer tax would reflect the general increase in property values. Consequently, revenues derived from such a tax would increase over many years along with property tax revenue. And as Michelle indicated, that isn't going to happen with a parcel tax. So this is a solution that could last for many, many years.
I also, an attraction that occurs to me is, of course, for anyone on a fixed income retiree or something like that, it doesn't affect you. It's tied to an event. Whether you're selling your property, not like a UUT, you know, with inflation and everything else eating up your budget. It's another thing you have to pay as you go, whereas this you only pay when you're selling that.
I don't think you have to be on a fixed income to appreciate that you don't have to pay the tax now. You may not have to
Absolutely.
pay it for 30 years.
I appreciate it. I think we can all appreciate it, but I'm thinking about people for whom that would be a material.
Or hopefully never pay it if you can get your buyer to pay it.
Well, there you go. Well, an economist would say you're paying it. but
Right, yeah, I
anyways, it's
understand.
all fine.
Yeah.
That's it? Okay. Discussion on the committee of what we've heard?
I have a question for the working group that evaluated particularly the charter city, which is a concept that I was not familiar with before I joined this committee. But just doing a little bit of research. So as I understand, in California, there are currently 482 towns and municipalities that are incorporated. And 121 of them are charter cities. And if you look at the list of charter cities, these are the bigger towns. You know, one of the things that the California League of Cities, that was the source of my information, they said, okay, well, what are under the California Constitution, what are the requirements of a charter city? And then there's 4, it's non-exclusive, it's just 4 that are minimum, that are listed. And then they say things like you have to run your own elections, you have to have your municipal officers have to be elected. But the one that caught my eye is that a charter city needs to regulate its city police force. And so, but I know that Los Altos Hills does not have its own police force. I'm just wondering, but when I did just a spot check, I did not check all 121. When I did just a spot check, all of the charter cities that I checked had their own police force. I'm wondering if, and this may be a question for the city attorney, or somebody who's more knowledgeable about the interpretation of the California Constitution, but I'm wondering if that crossed your analysis in terms of, would they becoming a charter city necessitate having our own police force?
We did not address that, but Los Altos Hills has gone much further than we have toward implementing this, and soon they've had their town attorney review it.
That's a great question. Perhaps our contract with the sheriff's office council is regulating it, but I'm not an attorney, so it's just an idea.
So I have questions on the UUT. At one time, the council could choose to reduce the rate. Do you know if that's still in effect?
That expired last fiscal year.
Okay, so right now I don't want to use the word stuck with the 7.
Yeah, the last election, the 1% reduction expired. So if they wanted to do it again, it would require a vote.
And at one time, the UUT did expire itself, but now it doesn't
Right, they did, and then they gave the council authority to extend it, but that extension expired July or June 30th, 2021.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but the overall UUT itself is extended?
The 1% reduction.
Right, no, but
That
the,
expired.
right, no, I understand, but the,
It's now, so it went from 6.5 to 7.5% for the 23-24 fiscal year.
right, but at one time, we had to revote the UUT itself.
Right, and the election prior, I can't remember which year it was, but the council was given the authority to extend the temporary extension or the 1% reduction up until June 30th of 2021. After June 30th, 2021, it's now
No, but I'm
7.5%.
talking about the total UUT itself. I
Right.
can, so now it's
It's 7.5%,
for,
5.5% general fund, 2% open space.
for, and it doesn't expire?
It's not.
It no longer expires. I know we no longer vote on it.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to, well, obviously, if we want to raise it or, in thinking in combination with a charter tax or a real property transfer tax. So if we wanted to put in any reductions, we'd have to have that election would have to include the possibility to reduce it. The voters would have to agree to reduce that reduction.
Any change to the allocation of the UUT will require.
Okay. But we could do it at the same time if we
Right.
were in it, okay, if we were doing a real property transfer tax, okay. And I just wanted to make one more comment about the parcel tax, as I think Paula pointed out. There's a long delay in implementing, in collecting property tax if we don't vote for it until November of 26. No, yeah, 2 years from now. It doesn't get assessed until June of 27 and not collected till December and April, December 27. So we're talking about a longer delay, and I'm not sure how long our finances can go.
Yeah, I agree with you, I guess. All
Um,
of these are pretty long
well,
term, right?
Ken
Charter Town-
Ken didn't mention there's in theory a special election which has its own rules. But say it was November of 26 that the voters approved the charter city concept, there would be an effective date. And then once that effective date happened, when the escrow company, when the properties were sold, I presume the town would receive the tax. I mean, there's no, 12-month delay, whatever. There's
Yeah, I
less
think-
of a delay.
I think, I agree with your assessment. I think UUT would probably follow a similar path. Once you elected to make a change to UUT, then it could be implemented reasonably real time, but I'm sure getting all the utilities to update their rate schedules and all that takes some time. I'm no expert.
I've got a question for Ken or Michelle. You mentioned a cost in Los Altos Hills. They're thinking of $150,000 or so. That sounds surprisingly reasonable, given estimates that I'd heard bandied about at the beginning of this process that were nearly an order of magnitude more than that. So is that the only data point? And secondly, how confident is Los Altos Hills that they can deliver it on that basis? In other words, there's a big difference between, say, $1 million that we'd have to come up with to do this versus 150K.
That is the only data point that we have. However, Los Altos Hills, the staff presented this to the town council. So it isn't that it's just a number that they picked out of thin air.
Okay.
However, they also wanted at that time, which was like back in May or so, they wanted to actually have the election this November. So they wanted an abbreviated process, quick process to write the charter, get the polling done. And so they agreed that if it wasn't done this November, which it isn't going to be done, as it turns out, they would spend more money on polling and consultants to see what the residents wanted or would be willing to pay for.
Got it. But I just want to point out the polling seems optional, right? It just sounds like the hard costs that they're talking about is $60,000. I mean, because 50K was communications, 40K is polling, you know, what you said. So the hard costs aren't nearly as high as I thought. Now, you might have to have all those other costs in there to make sure you're doing something the voters don't reject, so it's maybe necessary,
You'd also have to include election costs.
but it's part of an election. has to be
Right,
part
but
of an
if they go off cycle, then
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I thought Ken said you can't go offset.
You can't, there is an exception, which if you declare a certain kind of emergency. Los Altos Hills said they did not comply with that. They would not be enabled to have that. I'm not sure what would make us any different. The reason that Los Altos Hills is wanting to move forward on this is their costs, just like our costs of public safety and emergency preparedness, have gone up dramatically. Now, Atherton, on the other hand, is more interested in the possibility that as a charter city, you wouldn't have to agree with or comply with all of the state's housing issues. That seems to, most people, from what I've read, don't believe that a charter city will allow you to get away with that at all. But there's a few counties, I think, or cities down in Southern California, which are getting away with it at the moment.
Yeah, what happened is Pam Lee, an attorney with, I forget the name of her firm, she won a lawsuit on behalf of one of the cities against the HCD requirements. And apparently that rests though on how Sacramento wrote the law. So Sacramento could always rewrite the law in question, I think. So I'm not sure that would be a durable solution.
I agree with you. That's what most people seem to think, that there's not much of a chance. That isn't the reason to become a charter city.
Yeah, and then that's beyond the scope of this committee. We're thinking of this from the financial side.
yeah, all the legislator would have to do is put a line that says include charter cities.
Okay, more discussion?
I have a question about a revenue idea that I don't think was ever on one of these lists, maybe because it can't be done. We have franchise fees that the town collects from basically the various utility providers to the town. I think there's like 5 or 6 of them. Are those franchise fees negotiable between the town and the providers? Or are they set by law?
They were set by contract when they first accepted the franchise. I'd have to look deeper if there's any room for negotiation. Yeah, they're usually between 1% and 5%.
Do they tend to go up each year by more than just the amount of service they're providing? Or is that, or something else in the contract that escalates?
Well, it's based on gross revenue. So if their fees go up, we get a corresponding increase. It kind of operates a similar way as the UUT. But we get franchise fees from Comcast, Cal-Am Water, PG&E, and garbage.
Well, I'll just put that on the table. Maybe it's something we can't do, but I was curious about whether we have any influence on that number.
I can answer the question with regard to Comcast, having been on the cable committee. Comcast franchise fee is now set by the state. It's not
That is correct.
anymore followed by
That is correct.
our town.
That is correct.
So we have no influence on that at all.
More comments here at the committee before I open it to the public? All right, we'll start with Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you. This has been great discussion. I wanted to speak a little bit to the open space and the maintenance question. I would highly recommend you talk to the Open Space Committee. You know, a long time ago when I was on the committee, we, wrote memos talking about how those monies could be spent. And that went to the council and the council approved it. So I think there may be room there, and particularly given what's going on, but I wouldn't take it casually. I mean, please go through the committee, make sure that they're on board, and then bring something back to us at the council, just so everybody doesn't feel like, they're being, like, I don't want to feel like the committees are, sort of blindsiding each other, right? So, if you guys can sort of work through that, I think there's high value there.
Yeah, I want to say we fully agree.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
again, this was a exploration of options. and,
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah, and it's great. And that's why I said, great discussion. And I'm on board with, I mean, I think the only way you figure this out is you explore all the options. It's just making sure everybody understands it's an exploration and we're not doing anything without talking to you. And
Right.
because just, there's some past history where some stuff was approved through the city manager without ever talking to the open space committee, and that didn't go well. So, and then George, to your point, I would be shocked if you could become a charter city for 150K. I mean, I have never heard a number, and again, I've never heard a hard number, but all the number I've heard have been much more in that sort of order of magnitude more. I mean, just the idea that you could get an attorney to draft all the documents for 50K, I mean, pretty unbelievable to me. So,
Yeah.
I think that's the.
Yeah, I doubt we could use a chartercity.com template site or something, right? Yeah.
And I think when you do that, there's a lot of stuff you have to do that's specific to the town, which means, Portola Valley, we'd have a lot of meetings to discuss it. And, you know where that's going to go. It's going to take a much longer. The other thing, I don't know if you guys talked about it. I may have lost track of it. Did we ever figure out whether we can borrow money from the restricted fund? Does that give us any more runway?
You can.
We can, okay.
You
I
can
just-
do it short term. There has to be a repayment schedule and you have to pay it back with
Yeah, great. Okay. I mean, because that seems like when you guys write up your final thing, I mean, that's also something else that seems like it ought to be on there. Because like you say, half of our cash is in restricted funds. And so, particularly when we look at these things that, oh, we can't do them until 26 or later. I mean, anything we can do to increase our runway seems like it has high value.
Yeah, Craig, so in the last session, Bill presented a write-up on that as a concept.
Great. Yeah.
So it's okay. There's
Yeah,
a lot
I
of
just,
moving
I'm sure I
parts.
heard it in different.
But yeah, but what Tony said is what.
Yeah.
The research.
Perfect. Okay, great. And the rest of this stuff has been great. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And just one point I just want to double down on for everyone online is that agreeing with Chris, that when it comes to we're talking to the Open Space Committee, we're not making any recommendations. This isn't a question of, oh yeah, we have an idea, so we're going to run off and recommend that. We're effectively committees running after one another's funds. It's the opposite of that. It's just in the spirit of brainstorming. Here are all the things we can do. Here's a very large number in terms of dollars with interest going to it and so on and so forth. And so here's an item, and we'll talk to the committees and figure out what to do, if anything at all. Okay. Here in the room, Ray Williams, you had something to talk about. Can you go to the microphone so people online can hear you? Thank you.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions. For one, we have an audit, right? And usually the auditors come in with a very structured approach and provide information along the way, which you can do or not do. And I haven't heard anything about that. Well, I don't know if you're, and I believe the town hasn't had an audit in the past for some, to me, stupid reason. And so that's a question to me. You're gonna pay this money to an auditor. You expect them to come in and look at your records. You expect them to form an opinion, and you expect them to communicate that to you in a form that you can do something with or not. It's depending on you, right? You can hire some low budget auditors and nothing will happen, right? He'll write him a check and it'll be bye-bye donation. The second thing, my observation is as a long-standing resident, is if we're $1 million short, I don't understand which one of you is responsible for coming up with a program to save $1 million and what it is you're going to do over the next couple of months, get it done. Whether you're going to part we're gonna do, we'll kind of cut back on spending or do something. I mean, you've talked kind of about having a cost accounting system. That's not that is not an easy answer, right? That's a good thing for you to kind of talk about it. But in terms of trying to save $1 million, that's not worth the effort. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And I'll just comment that we've been working on the audit for quite a while, and we are audits, and then the spending thing, we're talking about that at the last meeting, this meeting, future meetings, in terms of spending and revenues. Anyone else here in the room? We'll hear from Dave Cardinal next. Dave?
Sure. Some quick comments. First, I think this is great. I mean, it's exactly the kind of meeting we need to have. Specifically on the property tax recovery, I'm all in. I mean, I don't know how we got to where we are and why we're so far below the kind of canonical model for property tax going back to the cities, but anything we can do to fix that, I think it's great. And anybody who is volunteering to do that is great. Second, Craig mentioned a little bit about the open space maintenance, but I think there was a very specific discussion where I think it was about $80,000 a year in the budget. And as I recall, at least one of the budget discussions, basically 50,000 of the last year or this year was cut out of that budget and sent over to the open space committee to pay. So I think there is some precedent, and there was a lot of pushback, and I'm sure we'll hear from Betsy soon. The open space committee doesn't like it, but they have, we in that fund have a lot of money and we're short of other money. So I think it's something we have to look at. Finally, on the real property tax, I think that's great. I agree with Craig that 150K is kind of hypothetical. It might be what Los Altos Hills thought it would take to get the ballot measure approved, but the administrative requirements of being in a charter city are substantial, and we currently at least don't really have any town staff to speak of, hardly. So I think that's a different cost that has to be factored in. It's not just what does it take to get the town to vote yes, or what are the ongoing administrative costs. And they might be worth it. I'm all for the idea of an RPTT. I just want us to be open-eyed about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Other people online with comments on this? The theme that I got from Craig and Dave though as well is that it's something we can all do maybe before our next meeting is try to see what the costs are for charter cities, see if we can find any other data points or information online or talk to someone. I'll try to think of things I can do, but and members of the public too, if anyone has any insights into what it costs to set up a charter town and then maintain a charter town. Because in some respects, an RPTT sounds like a great solution, except if it costs $1 million and then adds hugely to your burdens going forward, then it would be a Pyrrhic victory to get one. Yeah. Great. And for those online, Craig Taylor just volunteered to check with somebody at Los Altos Hills on the council there to get some more information on that. That's great. But I welcome other input on that too, because that's the big unknown here. We would hate to embark on a course that wound up sounding great, but turning out to be too costly.
The other thing is St. Helena up near Napa in this November is voting. I don't know if you have any contacts there. No.
And the other city is Atherton, which over the last 4 years or so has looked at this multiple times. They haven't moved forward because their desire is to avoid, isn't money, it's housing. Yeah. But you may know someone there who knows what it costs to write the charter.
And Rita, I see you have your hand up. Please talk to us.
Yeah, thank you for taking my comment. I really appreciate all the extra work that the people on the dais have put into this and the people in the community have put into this. But when you're talking about saving $60,000 here and $70,000 there, it's not small change, but in the big picture, you know, like my comment earlier about contractors and not having transparency about how much money that we're in the red every month spending. You know, I have a teenager. If she's not balancing her money, you know, there's no boba tea. And so I really appreciate what you're doing, but I think we have to also really look at the books, look at this budget, see where we're bleeding money, and looking at the contractors and seeing, you know, what we're getting out of it. And for the parcel tax, does anyone know what the percentage out of the 1,900 approximate homes that we have in town, what's the percentage that actually pays parcel tax? That would be a good number to know. So when we're figuring it out, we don't just say, oh, 1,900 times X amount of dollars per value, but we really look into what the actual return would be before we start spending so much money to tax the citizens extra, and then you're only taxing a handful of citizens. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you, Rita. Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people are exempt from certain parcel taxes on account of age and perhaps other factors.
I can add a comment from my work with the school district. The school district doesn't exactly overlap with the town. It actually includes just more parcels taxable in total in the school district that are in the town, but they're close. They're within like 10% of each other. And the as I recall, something like 26 or 27% of all of the parcels in the school district were exempt, most of them because of an exemption for seniors over 65, but it wasn't automatic. They had to apply for it. And then there's a handful of parcels that are non-taxable, churches and other types of things. My guess would be it'd be very similar for the town. So, I mean, if we wanted to think about it, assume 25 to 30% of the whatever parcels we have in town. Is at 1,900. I think Rita's number might be close to the correct one. That's probably what's taxable.
Great. So we'll do like a 70% assumption for what we get out of that. A quick question for you, Tony, and that is, I know we have a fee study that is going to be underway soon.
Yes.
Any sense for when we might have an outcome from that? Because that may go some distance towards closing deficit.
You mean outcome, are you saying a contractor selected or the whole process?
So the whole process, in other words, if we're sitting here and at least, I know you can't prejudge these things because you got to know what the costs are and then you can charge for your costs.
Mhm.
But the ability to do a, rubric on, it might produce an extra $100,000 a year for the deficit or. it
Yeah,
might
that'll
produce-
be farther along the process when they actually have the proposed fee schedule.
Right.
And then the question's gonna be, do we want to charge 100% cost recovery?
Right,
Do we want
right.
80%? And then that's when we start getting into, but that'll be probably around February or March.
February, March. Okay, so no time
Um,
soon.
Yeah, if anything
6 months.
goes. I mean, we had one proposal. We received one proposal. Apparently there was a dirge of RFPs out there.
Okay.
So, but, yeah, it'll be 4 or 5 months from now.
Okay, thank you. So we won't wait on that. Rita, is your hand still up from before or is it something new?
Sorry, that's from before. I'll take it down. Thanks.
Okay, no worries. Didn't want to ignore you if you had something else. More discussion?
Yeah, I
George,
think
this is Karen. My hand has been up.
Oh, gosh, I haven't seen it. I
So
don't-
has mine.
I'm not.
It's behind the banner.
Oh, you're behind the Zoom banner, so apologies for me not seeing your hand. And if I'm missing anyone else, please let me know. So let's start with Karen Askey.
Thank you. First of all, kudos to all of you for all the work that you're putting in and really good thought. And I'm, as a resident, I'm really, really pleased to see all of this work going on. So thank you again. In the interest of looking at additional revenue, and perhaps this is under the fee study, and perhaps it's been discussed, but is there any opportunity to create revenue from the police substation that we have? You know, if the sheriffs have increased their contract, is there some kind of value we have with that substation? And should we be looking at that? Whether it's revenue we charge or it's a fee reduction to the contract. And then a question on the chart that Michelle and Ken put up. My understanding is that there's already a 1.1% tax, this transfer tax. So when you put up the individual amounts per home and it says 3.3%, that's the total, that's not the incremental of what someone would pay, right? So in reality, there's already a 1.1% tax. So the 3.3 would really be 3% would really be 1.9. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. I do think you're an order of magnitude off. I think it's 0.11%.
Yeah, it's per thousand, and no, this would be on top of the existing county
Okay,
transfer tax.
so it's additional. Okay,
And
thank
we
you.
don't, the town doesn't get the county tax. It
Well,
goes to the wonderful people in our county.
no, but when you were talking about the amount that an individual would have to pay, whether it's the buyer or the seller, that's what I was asking about. So I just wanted, so what I'm hearing is that's additional to what's already there.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And again, I've managed to clear a banner saying this was being recorded from my screen. So I now see hands. So I apologize to Betsy. I hope you weren't waiting long. Please talk to us.
Oh, you're worth waiting for, George. Thank you. Thanks to the committee, to all of you for the hard work that you're doing. A couple of quick points. One, I'm a member of the Open Space Committee. I am speaking for myself, but I would venture I probably would get unanimous, a unanimous outlook on the issue that's before you today, and the way that it's been presented is really express clearly your intent to honor the will of the voters. When it comes to the UU tax, that has always been the position of, that has always been my position and the position of the other people on the Open Space Committee. I think I've even spoken with Craig about this. So that's quite different from maintenance and other issues, distinct from the $8 million fund that we have. But the UU tax is an issue for the voters. And as long as we're consulting the voters, we can live with the outcome. And I think that deserves being underlined. As long as there is good process in this town, we can live with the outcome. It's when our process fails us that we have problems with outcomes. Secondly, the charter city conversation, very interesting. I didn't know that Atherton has been looking at it for 4 years, but what I had heard, because at the time Portola Valley was toying around with the idea, not very seriously, but in 2018, Menlo Park got deep into the process. It was all set up to go on to become a vote of the people that November. And in a relatively last minute emergency session, the town council pulled the issue off the ballot and set up a special committee to look into it. So 2018 is still recent enough that you can probably find some good information in Menlo Park about what caused them to spend so much time and resources and then back out. and thirdly, I really want to compliment Tony McFarland. Thank you so much for coming to join us, Tony. Your forthcoming responsiveness in a number of areas to various questions, some of mine, and including today your offer to provide fund balances to the committee at their meeting intervals. I just think it's a wonderful sign that we're moving in the right direction. So thank you very much for that. Lastly, just to clarify an understanding that I took, I'm not sure if it was correct. You were discussing the 2021 audit. The conversation seemed to come to an abbreviated conclusion. And what I understood was that this will come back to with the full component parts, the revisions that Tony spoke of. It will return to the committee on September 18th, just checking that, that piece of information. With that, I'm good, and thank you.
Just to clarify, Betsy, I will probably not have it by the 18th. Because it'll probably be, we'll be scheduling another meeting.
Yeah, I think on the 18th, what we are going to have on the agenda, Betsy, is we're going to have this memorandum of internal controls that wasn't appended to the packet that everyone else saw. And it just is highlighting the deficiencies the auditors found in some of the finance department's practices in 2021 and what's being done about it.
All right, all right.
But I will endeavor to have a draft of the end
Yeah.
meeting.
Okay, well, thanks for your efforts and for the clarification.
But we're not done. We're going to be on audits
I hear you loud and
every
clear.
meeting. for a while.
Right.
Okay.
Righto, thanks.
Anyone else with comments? More discussion here based on what we've heard? Any other business to discuss tonight?
Well, at some point, are we going to figure out next steps?
Yeah, my sense for that is we should continue the conversation. And at our next meeting in sort of a week or so, we're going to know more about what our budget deficit status is. Is that right? On the 18th, we'll have a sense for the September revision and what we're really facing in terms of a budget deficit. And then we should have a further conversation about these items here, where hopefully we understand some of what the cost of a charter city is, because I view that as perhaps the biggest variable. Is that something that would be at the top of the list or near the bottom of the list based on how complicated, challenging it is? And then we would want to hash out what we would all think about as a committee to recommend in terms of UUT, parcel taxes, et cetera.
So George, your comments leads me to believe that you're thinking that the September budget will indicate our structural deficit, and I'm not sure it will because you're delaying lots of things. And so it would seem to me, in order for us to determine what is, that we should know what the structural deficit is. Are we looking for $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million? Which number is it? Not just this year, but in the future years when we pay the full amount to the sheriff. And so having a 3 or 5 year projection of what's likely to come is something that I think we should be asking for.
Is that something we can get?
I don't have the last 3 fiscal years. I need that beginning number so that I can project out. But again, and as I've said before, it's something you should have already had. And I can do my best guesstimate, but again, I'm gonna have to big giant caveat that that beginning fund number, there's certain things that need to take place before that number becomes reasonable. I'm not gonna say accurate. I want to get to a point of it's reasonable. And I just have more data I need to get to that point. But there's certain numbers I can work with now. But again, I would have to have a giant caveat to where the projection is going to be in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I would say any data you can give us together with the caveats that it's just directionally indicative, as we say, when we don't have much money in startup, or much data rather in startup land. That would really help because otherwise we're in a chicken and an egg situation, as Ken just pointed out. We go through a lot of work to plug a
Right.
hole and then we would hate to, go to the voters and have congratulations, we're done, to find out we're not.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and before we go to the voters, you want to have those numbers
Yeah.
locked in.
Mhm.
So, and the voters deserve that.
And we know what we're doing.
Tony, another question. Does the town of Portola Valley have the power to issue their own municipal bond or bonds? And have we ever? You're not?
I'm not familiar or not aware. I don't think we've issued any bonds. I'm not seeing, I haven't seen any documentation on that. But I can look into that further.
So Tony, you're saying until the audits are complete, you won't know the fund balances,
I won't have a reasonable number
right?
to
That-
work with, but I can,
That's a bet.
I
okay.
can work with what we've built in for expenses this year. And I can project
Right.
where the sheriff's contract's
Right,
going.
okay.
I can probably build in an assumption for salaries and benefits, but it's the other costs. And then it's the CIP, probably which ones actually need to be done, which if we're going to be deferring maintenance, there's a cost associated with that. And, but it's something I can work with.
Yeah, I would think when we're thinking of plugging a structural deficit in terms of trends that would have been status quo in prior years in terms of things going up on the cost side and also
Right.
on the revenue side, it's probably ceteris paribus, but the big thing, the big structural things that have changed, of which notably the sheriff's contract. was
Right.
a
That's the biggest one, yeah.
huge one.
Right. But then it's the staffing levels have fluctuated and we budgeted for X amount, we've only had Y and.
Yeah, and then we have
and-
to allow
right.
for the actual
And
staff.
then,
we're
and then
gonna
there's the offset with the consultants, the use of consultants. It's correlates with the staffing level.
Yeah, so we really want to look at whatever the big delta is, that's outside of our control. And the sheriff's contract is the big one there.
Yep.
And then whatever we're staffing for, we have to assume that we'll hire the staff.
Right.
So we're paying for them, but then we won't be paying for some of the contractors that we won't need anymore. Right. Okay.
So there's also another large cost, and that's pension and OPEB.
Well, we have the OPEB trust now, so as we invest more into that, that's gonna decrease that liability.
Right.
But yeah,
the
there are
question is, How
pensions
much
and-
do we need to invest in that?
Right.
And then there's the pension, which was looking pretty good a couple of years ago, but may not be today.
We had a good investment return last year.
Yeah, that's one bright spot. The stock market's been doing better.
So is the proposal then to have rough estimates for the next meeting of this structural deficit? Otherwise, we can't really proceed, right? We won't know how much we're talking about. Is that right?
I will endeavor
Yeah.
to have something for
Well,
you.
a rough sense, whatever you're having, so we can carry the discussion
Okay,
further.
yeah, I can
Because
do it.
what I've got for the next week is for us to try to figure out, to the extent we can.
But I also still have to do the staff report.
Yeah,
For
oh,
council.
I get it.
Yeah.
How expensive is Charter City land? Is it the $1 million thing with continuing costs, or is it the hundreds of thousands of dollars with continuing costs that are manageable? And then if we also have a corresponding sense for this year, we probably have $1 million deficit. The structural bit, though, looks like it's at 1.2 once the
Mhm.
sheriff's contract was in at 1.5, or I don't know
Right.
what it is, but. And what's the number that we need to try to look for? And then we can start to talk about what the mix of all that would be, and with a sense towards, well, we have UUT, how high can that reasonably go? There's continued appetite for open space, and that's in the law right now, and that would be an election. And then, of course, parcel tax, the same kind of thing, and only 70% of the residences pay
Mhm.
Parcel tax, so we have to start factoring all of these items together in terms of what might be tolerable.
Just to clarify again, so we have a reduced sheriff's contract for this year and next year, or just?
We
this year?
have, well, he's discounted $1 million that's gonna be phased in over 3 years. So it's 400,000 and 300,000 and 300,000.
But Michelle, is that when I looked at the contract, while that may be the understanding, contractually, it's only a 1-year contract that goes until the next June.
So that could be any number.
No, but we do have a memorandum from the county for the credit. In fact, I think they were that's circulating right now.
So they wrote it down. All right, well, I would encourage everyone in the committee as we go and think about this in the next week, based on what we all heard today, to just pencil in what, may make sense from your perspective and bring it to the conversation next week.
Next
9 days
Wednesday.
from now. Yeah, next Wednesday.
Following Wednesday,
Yeah. And then we'll hear from
Couple extra
you
days.
with some of your ideas, and we'll all have our ideas, and we'll have a
Right.
conversation then. I mean, this is still sort of brainstorming, right? So
Right.
there's no hard numbers attached to this right now because of uncertainty on your end, and frankly, we're all learning as we go. But I know for one thing, a lot more than I did before the meeting started today in terms of sensitivity of these different elements. That sound good? Okay. Anything else here on the committee? Do I hear a motion? Move to adjourn. Okay, brilliant. Second?
Second.
Okay, in favor. We are adjourned at 5:51.
5:51.
Thank you, everyone.